Hello, my name is Neil Klein. I'm an AR engineer on the Spectacles team, and today we're going to talk about Spectacles UI Kit. UI Kit is a library of components, utilities, and tools designed to build user interfaces. UI Kit and Spectacles Interaction Kit work together. Spectacles Interaction Kit is a source for user data on our platform. It provides hand input data, mobile controller data, hand visualizations, cursors, and more. If you haven't heard of Spectacles Interaction Kit, consider pausing and checking out some of our resources below. UI Kit provides the visual and interactive in-lens elements for building interfaces. And under the hood, it uses Spectacles Interaction Kit for its interactions. If you install UI Kit, but you don't have Spectacles Interaction Kit in your project, it will automatically get downloaded and added to your project's assets. UI Kit is in active development, but we already have a full offering of elements and visuals to use in your projects. We have buttons, toggles, switches, sliders, text input fields, backplates, tooltips, and interactive frames. Each element has a bespoke design from the Snap OS design system, and base components like buttons have multiple styles to choose from. Snap OS design system is guided by 3 core principles. Tangible and expressive. We provide clear feedback for user interactions. Simplicity. User interactions are easy to understand and reduce cognitive load in real-world busy situations. Visual consistency. We maintain a cohesive look across our platform. Now, let's see these components in action and build a color picker. So we're in a default Lens Studio project here, and I'm gonna set it up the way I like it. And you can set yours up however you want. Don't worry about setting up to match mine. I'm gonna delete the lighting because we're not gonna be using that. And on the camera, I'm going to add device tracking and set it to world. If you use the Spectacles template, all of this stuff will get done for you. First, I'm installing Spectacles Interaction Kit. And then I'm going to refresh the scene so we can have it load. Here's our example interface. You can see that there's a bunch of components here. We have a scrollable window with a scroll bar. You can grab anywhere in that window and scroll. You can interact with these elements. We've got round buttons. We have buttons set to toggle. We have switches that are in a switch group, so they toggle themselves on and off. We have toggles, similarly in a toggle group. And we have other button examples. We can even go into the prefab here and look at some of these button examples and even switch the colors really quickly through this style dropdown here. And you can see the primary style, the secondary style, and they just activate. Cool. Now let's start to build our own interface. So under our UI element, I'm going to create a slider. I'm going to name this slider. And we're going to add a slider component. I'm going to move the UI scene object back to -100 so we can see it in the scene. And here's our slider. Cool. Now let's add a custom TypeScript to our UI scene object here. And we're going to start doing some coding here. Let's rename that script to color picker. And let's edit it in VS Code. Now let's rename this script color picker, and let's provide an input for our slider. We do that by typing @input, and then I'm going to name the variable slider, and it's going to be of type slider. And make sure that's imported from Spectacles UI Kit package. Now, if we go back to Lens Studio, on our UI element, we'll see that we have a slot for a slider here. I'm going to drag the slider into that slot, and then refresh the scene. Great. Now we have the slider and it's attached to our script. Now in our script, I'm going to create a new event. This is done by typing this dot create event, and using the onStart event, I'm going to bind a new function. And in this function, I'm going to attach to the slider's update value callback. So I'm going to say this dot slider, which is the slider that we attached in our input earlier, dot on value change, and then I'm going to also dot add a new callback to this. And then I want to make sure that we print our callback value here. So now Back here in Lens Studio, if I grab this slider and slide it, you can see that I'm printing out the value of the slider into the console below right here. So you can see it goes up to 1 and down to 0. I'm going to rename this value. And let's repeat this a couple more times and create some new sliders. So we can do that quickly with duplicating that object. And then in our script, we'll take this line and copy it. Actually, let's name them sliders 1, 2, and 3. And then here we need to change this slider to slider 1. And then we're going to add this value change to all 3 of those. Now we have 3 sliders, and we have to attach them in our UI kit again. Let's refresh the scene. And there are 3 sliders there, but they're all just layered on top of each other. So I'm going to take the first slider and I'm going to move it up. And I'm going to take the last slider and I'm going to move it down. Cool. And now we have 3 sliders, each one printing out the value where I'm sliding to. Now, so let's imagine each of these sliders could be used for values in our color picker. The top one could be R, the second one could be G, and the last one could be B. Let's add a plane with a custom material so we can see a color. So I'm going to add another new scene object to our UI element here. I'm going to call this palette. So I created a new scene object called palette. I'm going to add a render mesh visual to it. And in this render mesh visual, I'm going to add a unit plane, which I already have in Spectacles UI kit. And then I'm going to create a new material, and I'm going to make an empty material. And I'm going to call this empty material palette, and its shader is also called palette. Now I'm going to open the shader editor, move it into this pane here so it's easier for everybody to see, and I'm going to add a new float input. I'm going to name this float parameter base color, and I'm going to give it a script name of base color, but in camel caps. And I'm going to make this RGB, and then I plug that into our color. Now we have a palette, and let's move it down below our sliders, and let's make it a lot bigger. Let's say 10 by 10. Let's go back to our script and provide an input for the palette on our script. Actually, we don't want the palette itself, we want the palette material, because that's how we're going to change its color. I'm going to go back to Lens Studio, and I'm going to go back to the UI element and see this empty material here, and I'm going to drag the palette material there. Refresh, make sure everything loads. Cool. I'm going to add a new function, and it's going to be called update color. And I'm going to call this function every time we move one of our sliders. So here I'm going to replace these prints with update color. And then in our update color, I'm going to say, let's define a new variable called color. Let color equal a new vec4 with the values 0, 0, 0, 1. And then now we have it set up. So every time we move one of the sliders, we call update color. So what we want in here is the value from each of these sliders to be applied to that color. So we'll say, for example, color.r equals this dot slider1 dot current value. And we can repeat that over for color B and G from sliders 2 and 3. And then finally, we're going to take this color variable and apply it onto our palette materials main pass dot base color. And this is the color parameter that I set up earlier in the shader editor. And we're going to set this to color. And now, if we go back to Lens Studio, we should see this change colors as I move these knobs. Great. So it's changing color, but it's only changing on end or start. So our color was only updating on end, and that's because we're using current value, which gets updated at the end of any interaction. So instead we want to grab the knob value, which is the actual value that the knob is at. And we should see back here in Lens Studio, things change color as we drag the knobs. And you can see this one is set up to R, this one's set up to B. So if I drag down the R, we just have blue. And then finally we have G. And now we have a very rudimentary color picker where we can just kind of drag back and forth to select R, G, and B. What if we wanted to have another more expressive color space here? Maybe hue, saturation, and value. What if we wanted to switch between RGB and hue, saturation, and value? I think that's a good situation to use a switch. So let's add 2 switches and a switch group to our scene. So I'm going to come back to the UI element. I'm going to create a new scene object. I'm going to add a switcher. And in here, I'm gonna add a switch toggle group. And then as a child of those, I'm gonna create 2 switches. I'm gonna duplicate that. I'm gonna call this one RGB. I'm gonna call the second one HSV. I'm gonna add those 2 switches to our switch toggle group here. And then I'm gonna position them in the scene. First, I'm gonna move them up out of the space of the sliders, and then move it over, and I'll move HSV up and over as well. So now if I click on HSV, RGB turns off, and if I turn on RGB, HSV turns off. Now we wanna get this value into our script. So we're gonna come back to the script, and we're gonna add a new input. I'm gonna take the entire switch toggle group, and I'm gonna call it switcher, switch toggle group, and now we have a new input. We're gonna go back to Lens Studio and hook up our new input. Here on the UI, we're gonna grab this switch toggle group. Cool, refresh, everything's working here. Now I'm also gonna add a callback for that switch. We're gonna go this.switcher, and then we're gonna do on toggle selected, and we're gonna have a callback here, and we're gonna have the value right here. Now let's print out what we're getting from that value. Getting an object. Cool, so that's our scene object. And now we're gonna use this name that we got and make sure that we have which scene object that we're clicking on. So we're gonna say toggleable.sceneObject.name. So now I'm gonna click this one and we should see HSV, that's right. And I'm gonna click this one and we should see RGB. Cool, that's exactly what we want. So now I'm gonna add an additional variable to our class here. I'm gonna call it color type, and I'm gonna make this one a string. And then first I'm gonna have it set to RGB. I'm gonna take color type, and I'm gonna set it to be equal to the name of the toggleable that we just clicked on. Rad, okay, cool. We have this data available in this variable in our entire class. So we can come down here, and when we update color, we can check out which color type we have. So I'm gonna drag this, and we should see that we're in RGB. And then I click this, and then we'll see that we're in HSV. So now, here, we're gonna add another way to create the color. So this one will be if color type equals RGB, we're gonna do this RGB calculation. Otherwise, if it's equal to HSV, we'll do a separate calculation where we can use a helper function from Spectacles UI kit. So we have an HSV to RGB function here. And in this, we can pass in multiple values. So we're going to pass in slider knob 1 as our hue, slider knob 2 as our saturation, and slider knob 3 as our value. And then finally a 1 for alpha. And we're gonna set color to be the output of this function. Let's go back and make sure this is all working. Okay, so here we have RGB, and then we switch to HSV, and we can start to see that now brightness is all the way down. If I turn it up, it becomes a little bit more white. I can change the saturation, and then we can change the hue. Uh-oh, the hue's not working. What's happening there? So what's actually happening there is that this is a value from 0 to 1, but the hue space is usually from 0 to 360. So we're gonna take that value and we're gonna multiply it by 360. Come back here, switch to HSV, turn up our brightness, turn up our saturation, and then go through all of the hues. Cool, now we have an HSV picker. Now there's just one more thing we can tidy up here. If I switch back to RGB, you can notice that it didn't change the color to match the RGB color here, and that's because we're not calling update color after we switch color type. So let's do that one more time here. And then we come back here and we're already to the color that it's set when we start. We change RGB, switch to HSV, it switches to that color. We can drag back and forth, and now we have a nice color picker here with 2 different color types. Switch back to RGB. Cool. Cool, now we have a color picker. What if you wanted to move this around in 3D space and carry it around with you? We have a component that can help with that. It's called the frame. So I'm gonna add a new scene object. I'm gonna take our UI and I'm gonna parent everything to that new scene object. I'm gonna name that new scene object frame, and I'm gonna add a component called frame. There used to be container frame, that was in SIK. Now we have a new component called frame in UI kit. It's very similar, but it has a totally different type of appearance. I'm gonna move this entire thing back, and I'm gonna reset the UI element to be at 0, 0 within that frame. Cool. Now you can see our frame here. This is the default sizes, the default positioning. I'm gonna take our content and I'm gonna move it forward slightly so it's in front of the frame. And now that you can see it. Everything's still interactive. And now let's take a look at the frame here. Our stuff is a little bit offset. So I'm gonna move it up to be centered. That looks pretty good to me. And then I'm gonna resize the frame. So I'm gonna come here to inner size and pull in the width. And I'm gonna pull down the height. I'm also gonna turn it so it's always on, so it's easier to resize. Cool. And I'm gonna turn off some of these settings here to allow scaling. And now we can take this whole interface and move it around. So imagine we were using a painting application and we wanted to change the colors. We could grab this interface, drag it over, pick our color. No, I wanted it in HSV, dial it in like this, come back here, do your painting, and then walk around your element, whatever you've been painting, and then have your color picker over here, look at it again, and change your color to do whatever you want it to do. We also have multiple versions of the frame. For example, there's a small version, which has a smaller border. So if this is an interface that's meant to be up close to you and directly interactable, you should select the small appearance. And in this way, if you turn on some of the helper buttons, for example, let's turn on the follow button. You can see that it fits right here in this smaller border. And we can use our built-in follow behavior. And now you could see, let's say we start using our color picker and you want to walk, but you don't want to carry it with you. You can just click this button and it will just follow along with you wherever you go. Now we have a color picker with 2 color types and 3 sliders, all in an interactive frame. There are many more components and you can imagine all of the combinations to build user interfaces. Please post whatever you make onto Reddit and ask us any questions. We're super excited to see what you build.